Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. This is the third episode of the series, and after the journey dedicated to Shakespeare and the one centered on Cervantes, this chapter represents the closing of a circle where stories, identities, and ideas intertwine at a deeper level. The story is told by Stefano Reali, screenwriter, director, and author, who guides us along a path made of hidden connections, difficult choices, and uncomfortable truths. Giordano Bruno was not merely a man of immense culture. He was someone capable of holding together knowledge and action, thought and body, intuition and risk. His memory was prodigious, almost mocking. He not only remembered everything, but he could argue for hours, 7, 8 hours straight, without hesitation, without gaps, never losing the thread. His lectures were not simple explanations. They were continuous flows of thought, constructed with astonishing precision. Before the age of 30, Bruno had already abandoned the priestly habit. It was 1576. He chose to become a philosopher, a teacher, a communicator. He sought university chairs because, at that time, teaching was the fastest and most effective way to spread ideas. Writing came later, often as a transcription of lectures. And indeed, Bruno wrote extensively. Even though today we know only part of his work, many writings remained hidden, forgotten, buried. Not by chance. For centuries, Bruno was rarely read, partly because many of his works were written in Latin, and partly because they were hermetic. Not only did they speak of hermeticism, but they were written in a coded way. On the surface, they said one thing, but to those who possessed the right key, they revealed something entirely different. And this is precisely why he is still uncomfortable to talk about, because even then, as now, what Bruno was saying was deeply unsettling for dominant thought. In recent years, however, something has changed. A new generation of scholars has begun to truly read Bruno, even in his most neglected works. What has emerged is an even more complex figure, not only a philosopher, but also a painter, poet, playwright, mathematician, linguist, and architect. Bruno had an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He was also the one who reintroduced tiered theater seating, inspired by Vitruvius and Serlio, creating the model that would later become the foundation of Elizabethan theaters. Before his arrival in England, those theaters simply did not exist in that form. And in England, Bruno taught philosophy for 2 years. One of his first decisive encounters was with John Florio, who is very likely the author of the so-called Italian plays attributed to Shakespeare. Bruno refused to speak English. He considered it too poor an idiom to express abstract concepts. It lacked fundamental verb tenses such as the subjunctive and the conditional. For this very reason, according to some hypotheses, many of the more sophisticated articulations of modern English were introduced by Florio himself. During his stay in London, Bruno was not only a philosopher and a teacher, he was also a secret agent in the service of the English crown. This is not speculation. It is stated by leading British scholars. After all, the Renaissance intellectual was not a fragile or withdrawn figure. He had to know how to fight, flee, and react. In the Renaissance, thinking freely was dangerous, and intellectuals rarely died in their own beds. What made Bruno famous throughout Europe was above all his art of memory, which he called the art of thinking. These were not simple mnemonic techniques, but a true system for organizing intelligence. One of his most important works, Clavis Magna, bears a subtitle that today sounds astonishing: Treatise on Artificial Intelligence. Not in the modern sense, of course, but as the artificial construction of thought. Drawing also on Cicero, Bruno pushed the technique of mental images to the extreme. He created the famous sigils, geometric figures resembling Renaissance rose windows, but in reality complex conceptual maps. Every part of the design corresponded to concepts, abstractions, logical pathways. With just 30 sigils, Bruno could memorize hours and hours of continuous discourse. For him, the brain, unlike the body, deteriorates without warning. We only notice it when we begin to forget. For this reason, he argued for the need to train the mind just as one trains the body, a true cerebral gymnastics. And all this would already be extraordinary if it weren't for the fact that Bruno also developed philosophical concepts of the highest level, anticipating by centuries intuitions that we now associate with quantum physics. Without telescopes, without instruments, he arrived at the idea of an infinite universe, of multiple worlds, of parallel realities. For Bruno, the soul is not bound by time. It can inhabit multiple bodies, even simultaneously, in contiguous universes. Time, he said, is a construction of the mind. If we observe it from above, like a field seen from a drone, past and future cease to exist. Everything is already present. And perhaps this is why Bruno claimed to have lived 1,000 lives, and to have truly lived them. At a certain point, an anonymous letter reaches the Holy Office. A letter that discredits Friar Celestino of Verona, accusing him of being a spy in the service of a high-ranking prelate, paid to smear Giordano Bruno. The content is clear, but what truly strikes is not what it says, it is who wrote it. Officially, it is anonymous. In reality, everyone immediately understands that it comes from above. It is a letter written by Bellarmine under the Pope's dictation. A political gesture. The pontiff cannot openly defend Bruno, but he can make it clear that he is watching every move. Cardinal Santori immediately grasps the message. He understands that the Pope is indirectly threatening him. If the affair continues, it might emerge that Celestino of Verona is his man. To extinguish all suspicion, Santori does the most brutal and paradoxical thing possible. He sentences his own informant to death. Celestino is sent to the stake just weeks before Bruno, officially for heresy and apostasy. But the execution takes place at night, in haste, without a notary, without an audience, without allowing the condemned to return to his cell for spiritual comfort. All of this violates established procedure. And here one of the most disturbing hypotheses opens up. There existed a secret device known as the Sagezzi Precept, a tool used by the Vatican when it wanted to condemn someone without actually killing them. Another condemned man would be executed in their place, while the real target was given a new identity, a pension, and total disappearance from history. Many clues suggest that Celestino of Verona did not die at the stake, but was replaced. Bruno learns of this. Bellarmine tells him openly, and together with other religious figures, the same offer is made to him. For him too, the Sagezzi Precept is possible. An isolated refuge, a farmhouse on Lake Martignano, a new identity, absolute silence. Accepting means surviving, but also ceasing to exist. No more books, no more ideas, no more Giordano Bruno. And here the story becomes tragically human. For a moment, Bruno seems to give in. After 7 years in prison, he agrees to recant. But between November and December of 1599, he changes his mind. At the very last moment, he realizes that a recantation would be the triumph of the Inquisition, the greatest rebellious philosopher saying, "I was wrong." So he makes the opposite choice. He forces the church to create a martyr. He refuses to recant. He refuses compromise. He refuses salvation. He is declared relapsed, unrepentant, obstinate. And this obstinacy has a precise consequence. No merciful strangulation. Bruno is burned alive. A gag is applied, an iron mouthpiece with a spike piercing the tongue to prevent him from speaking. As storytellers, one might think that the real victory would have been survival. But Bruno believed in the transmigration of the soul. He believed that dying was merely changing clothes. And perhaps the idea of becoming the martyr of thought for centuries to come was, for him, irresistible. The Vatican of that era was not merely a church. It was a transnational power, an empire that decided what could be read, who could teach, who could live. Bruno, like Van Eyne, like Campanella, like others, collided head-on with that power. Yet what makes him still relevant is not only his courage, it is his vision. For Bruno, imagination is not fantasy. It is direct vision of what is happening in another dimension of time. It is not invented, it is seen. And perhaps this is why, even today, his story continues to unsettle. Giordano Bruno is the emblem of the man in flight. He crossed all of Europe, but not out of a spirit of adventure. He traveled because he could not stop. Every stop was a temporary truce, every city a parenthesis before the next threat. He was not a traveler, he was a persecuted man. And perhaps this is the hardest point to accept. Because accepting that we have been deceived is always more painful than being deceived. It is easy to believe a narrative when everyone repeats it. It is much harder to stop and say, "They fooled me." Because that moment is not only intellectual, it is emotional. It means admitting that we adhered to something because everyone else did, because it was reassuring, because it was easier. Grand narratives work like this. They arrive, occupy all available space, hold entire nations hostage, and then, after a few years, they vanish. They disappear with the same speed with which they appeared. Language changes, words disappear, no one talks about them anymore. Yet while they were happening, they seemed unquestionable. The problem is not propaganda alone. The problem is the absence of debate. When on a given topic it is no longer possible to ask questions without being isolated, ridiculed, or excluded, that is precisely when we must stop and ask, who benefits from this silence? Because the Constitution allows us to say even foolish things. And that is right. Foolish ideas are dismantled with other ideas, with debate, not with censorship. When instead a narrative cannot be questioned, when it is protected by a moral cordon sanitaire, then we are no longer in the realm of truth, but of control. History serves exactly this purpose. To understand who we are and where we are going. Because the present is always hostage to propaganda. Only the past, if truly studied, allows us to orient ourselves. And it is no coincidence that true opponents of power rarely die in their beds. Those who do not conform, who do not homogenize, who refuse to become decorative, are often stopped early. Sometimes overtly, sometimes silently. History is full of inconvenient figures, erased, silenced, archived as accidents or coincidences. And this is where Giordano Bruno once again becomes our compass. Bruno chooses not to compromise. He chooses not to survive at the cost of disappearing. He chooses to force power to reveal itself for what it is. And in doing so, he becomes a symbol that crosses centuries. But true resistance is not only that of great martyrs. It is also daily resistance. It is grassroots seeding, slow, individual, stubborn work. It is the doubt that arises in a person acting in good faith, who deep down already knows they have been deceived, but struggles to admit it because doing so means questioning everything. And this is the hardest leap of all. Not convincing someone of something new, but helping them accept what they already know. For this reason, there are no ready-made truths to be handed over. There are only traces, clues, stimuli. The rest is individual responsibility. Every time something is sold to us as inevitable, convenient, fast, efficient, but without the possibility of going back, we should stop. Because what eliminates the previous alternative is not progress, it is control. Freedom lies in the possibility of choice. And this, ultimately, is the legacy of Giordano Bruno. The courage to look, to doubt, to pay the price of freedom rather than renounce one's conscience. And if today someone truly wanted to begin reading Giordano Bruno, not the academic version, not the simplified one, there is only one recommendation: the Ash Wednesday Supper. An ironic, ferocious, razor-sharp text. A dialogue that dismantles the certainties of its time and, even today, puts ours into crisis. If there is a red thread running through this story, it is choice. The choice to conform or to resist. To repeat what is convenient or to question what is true. Giordano Bruno is not just a historical figure. He is the eternal symbol of those who paid a price for thinking beyond permitted boundaries. And one question, today as then, remains intact. How far are we willing to go to defend freedom of thought? It's up to you. Verify, investigate, or dissent. Because propaganda lives on certainty, but freedom is always born from doubt. See you in the next episode.